and the Coast Guard will now come to order. Good afternoon. The purpose of today's hearing is to recognize the 40th anniversary of the enactment of what is known as the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, the MSA as we call it in Alaska, and to examine this law's impacts on managing our nation's fisheries, its successes, and possible areas of improvement. As I have mentioned at this committee many times before, Alaska's fisheries are by far the largest in the nation. I know my colleague from Massachusetts was just here. We refer to ourselves as the superpower of seafood. Almost 60% of all landings in America come from the shores of Alaska, or the waters of Alaska. But this wasn't always the case. Before President Ford signed the legislation, MSA, on April 13, 1976, residents in many of Alaska's coastal communities could see a wall of lights off their shores emanating from the large foreign ships that were catching Alaska's fish, America's fish, and taking our economic potential as a state and as a country back home with them. The MSA has successfully Americanized our fisheries and built the fishing industry in the United States that today is one of our largest employers, certainly in Alaska and in many other states throughout the country. Through the MSA's guiding principles, the 10 national standards as applied by the 8 regional fishery management councils who manage the fisheries off America's coasts in a science-based and open and transparent stakeholder-driven process, the MSA has resulted in the world's best managed fisheries, particularly in Alaska, where we have no overfished stocks resulting from fishing. Nationally, the impacts have been similar. Today, the Council and NIMS manage 469 stocks through 46 fishery management plans, and only a small fraction of these are impacted by overfishing, fewer than ever before. The value derived from harvesting these species in our country is near an all-time high. Bottom line, today's hearing is about a good news story. Congress recognized a problem, studied it, focused on balancing economic and sustainability issues, and acted in a bipartisan, long-term way that has dramatically and positively impacted our nation. Today, maintaining economics without jeopardizing conservation is the great charge that Congress has assigned to NIMS and all the councils, and it's a requirement that can obviously be a strained balancing act. But we must ensure that our nation's fisheries management system supports a stable food supply, recreational opportunities, and plentiful fishing and processing jobs for vibrant coastal communities. Conservation and management must go hand in hand, and we cannot allow a desire for preservation to replace a productive domestic seafood industry. Already today, under the law, the North Pacific and other councils are managing with conservation in mind, considering habitat protections, ecosystems management, and time, area, and gear closures to protect other fisheries and protected species. While some regions have had better and more abundant science than others, and some councils function more effectively than others, separating fish politics from science and allowing those closest to the fisheries to make decisions rather than someone back in Washington, D.C., is a true hallmark of the MSA. And it's Congress's job to provide the tools and resources to get this job done. The MSA has gone through 2 major reauthorizations, one in 1996 and another in 2006. And like anything else, from time to time, it may be appropriate and necessary for updates to respond to current conditions. Last year, the House of Representatives did just that with its MSA Reauthorization Act. Similarly, NIMS has proposed rules to update the National Standards Guidelines. But the National Standards Guidelines are not law and only serve as guidance to the Council. It's also worth mentioning that NIMS updates track similar issues as what is proposed in the House bill. At the same time, I've heard from Alaska's fishermen that our role as a steward of the MSA should largely be that of a doctor practicing the mantra, first do no harm. And that's a great testament to the vision and hard work of those who crafted the act 40 years ago, including the dozens of Alaskans that camped out in the offices of Don Young and Ted Stevens back in the 70s, as they and others, like Congressman Gary Studs of Massachusetts and Senator Warren Magnuson of Washington, crafted the law that would manage our nation's fisheries for future generations. And as Congressman Young is fond of saying, the Young-Studs Act has a much better ring to it than the Magnuson-Stevens Act. But we didn't call it that. Finally, this past year, this committee proved that we can do very important work on fisheries that is bipartisan and brings together support from industry and the environmental community as well. After almost a decade, we passed legislation, comprehensive legislation, to curb illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, the IUU fishing problem that the President signed a few months ago. With that, I would like to thank our witness, Mr. Shamrope, the Deputy Administrator for NIMS, for being here, and recognize now my good friend and ranking member for any opening statement that he may have.
I'm really